One other thing that kind of struck me about this whole medicine card thing was that it's another indication to me about what I've been talking about, how something's created in the brain first, and also how the mind and the brain aren't separate from matter in the external world. So I selected certain cards that were actually very relevant according to my brain, beyond just chance that each card has enough information to really speak to each position in the spread. So it's like the brain knows which card is there almost, or they're just one thing. Like the mind, the brain, and the gesture and the reaching for the material separate thing, supposedly, is still one thing. It's all consciousness, and how it said matter follows vision. The matter will follow it. The right cards will be there. They have to be, because this whole process of thinking and reaching for objects and moving external objects in space is all this epigesturetic, epimemetic dialogue. It's all one language. Our movements in matter and in consciousness is all one language. But we separate this sort of outer movement from this inner movement of thought, and we think it's separate because usually we're thinking about something that has nothing to do with the moment. So we really separate ourselves. But when we're not doing that, we see that it's one language, it's one communication, it's one dialogue, how we move our body and how our mind moves. And it's not our separate mind, it's the whole mind of the universe, the whole cosmos is one movement. And we can start to really understand that language and understand how the universe communicates with us, because we're an integral part of it, not separate because I'm thinking about 5 years ago. That's how we separate ourselves. So it becomes this really interesting flow. And I feel like when one is in touch with this subtle language, that one has to decondition or decouple from this old way of language, which is using language to separate us from the present moment, then we can actually be aware and integrally participating with the language of the moment as we're part of that. But if we're thinking about 2 years ago, we're not going to see those signs and those clues. And then when we first get in contact with in-map consciousness, we're like, oh, there's signs everywhere. Oh my God, there's clues everywhere. Synchronicity and all this thing. I actually think synchronicity is when it happens like that, so obviously it's just sort of a built-up missing of every moment. So then when we start to get in contact with the moment through the energy of the universe and the map consciousness process, we're like, wow, this is so magical, when really it's just how the universe communicates with us and as us and through us. That if we were in touch with it every moment, it would still be quite mysterious and intriguing and interesting and fascinating, but it wouldn't have that, oh my God, this is the most magical thing ever. Because that's how we feel if we take some kind of drug. So the problem is when we've been numbed out and dulled down by a repetitive ego, as soon as that sort of gets scrambled, then it feels like we are on a drug, because we've basically been on downers in terms of our own voice and thoughts used against us, repeating in our brains, making it deteriorate and dull out for years. So it's like just having a very sensitive nervous system all of a sudden and being really sensitive to the signs. But once one learns that language, one can be aware of it without being so hypersensitized by it. And then it just becomes like this really interesting game. Right now we play this ego game and play by all those rules. And it's not really an interesting game, so then we're looking for something else. We're looking for a different game. And I feel like we're seeking because we're not creating. And we're not creating because we're not seeing the way that we are the present moment and we create it it's created in our brain. And if our brain is really sensitive and not full of old memes on repeat, we can see what our brain then just created for us to see. And it's always so different. It's not the same thing. And it's subtle. It's not like so obvious. It was so obvious. It becomes so obvious when we first go into map consciousness. And then we think it's just this really obvious thing. But it only feels obvious because it's all of a sudden happening and it never has before. But when one understands that that's what's always happening, and one can notice it any time, it doesn't take time to find it. And we're looking for something in particular, and since we're seeking and seeking and seeking and think it's something away from the moment, that moves us away from the moment, and then we miss these subtleties of the moment. So really we're seeing the subtleties of each moment, which we don't really know what that is. It's an unknown energy that always presents itself differently. So if we think we know what we're looking for, we're definitely going to miss it. So it just becomes more and more subtle and fascinating. And I talk about it now, even like, oh wow, that was really interesting, but it's sort of like getting used to it. I think synchronicity, this really obvious manifestation of things moving in harmony, becomes synchronizing. It's just sort of always synchronous and always synchronized and always synergetic, and not like, boom, that was obvious, and boom, that was obvious, and boom, that was obvious. Like, whoa, what's happening in life? Oh my gosh, like, how is it so magical all of a sudden? Well, it's always been that way, but we're looking for something else. And so the universe sometimes comes in and makes it really obvious for us, but then it sort of blows our minds so much that we can't participate in sort of the functional domain of life because we're so enraptured by this magic. And the magic is there, and it's always there. But then when one sees that it's always there, it's not really that magical, yet still very beautiful. It's elegant. It's like this elegant design of some kind that we can unfold by our own discovery and creation, and actually discover how we're really creating our lives. It's nice to say thoughts create things, or thoughts attract stuff, or whatever. It's not really that. That is just another distraction, really. Because anything we choose to think to direct our attention is still going to direct it away from the richness of the moment that would surprise us with infinite wonders instead of the one thing that we're trying to focus on. And maybe if we focus, we might find that one thing that we want to focus on, but it's not what the universe wants. The universe wants us to be in touch with the moment, not focused on something very meaningless that we've been tricked into feeling like it's meaningful. So anyways, blah, blah, blah. So we're seeking because we're not creating what we're looking for. We have to create within ourselves to unfold as manifest. And really what we need to create is our own understanding. So then that understanding can arise in the manifest. Because if matter follows vision, understanding is part of vision. It's actually a process of seeing something for oneself. It's one's own discovery. And then when one has discovered it within oneself, it can be presented to the nervous system in the manifest. So that's how the vision arises first, the understanding, the insight, the discovery, and then the matter follows. So that vision, that understanding actually changes the algorithm in our nervous system to be able to receive that exact whatever that we just understood. And that's the confirmation, in a way, that the understanding was correct. But then even whatever that understanding was needs to be forgot about immediately, because there's an infinity of dynamics and processes to understand, and one can get stuck on something and then miss what's next. So yeah, what's really most important is one's own understanding. And it must happen in our own brain first. And by seeking, we only get better at seeking, which is moving us away from the moment. Seeking to me seems in opposition to understanding. There's no need to seek anything if one is just in touch with the moment. One will see something and understand it. And I really feel like so-called mental illness is just having all of those understandings that aren't even understandings at all. They're just programs and conditionings sort of deleted and suspended from our brain, which basically renders us non-functional, but there's an intelligence there in that we can possibly start to understand things for ourselves again from scratch and go step by step. And it's difficult to do that because we don't have the time and space to move through our own understanding, and are often given the understanding that all these diagnoses and labels come with. And that blocks understanding for oneself. But one can still do it at the same time. It's totally possible. It's possible to have one understanding that is sort of in the functional domain and might help a person stay functional while moving into understanding and through one's own understanding. And I actually feel like when I've had a crisis of some kind, all those so-called relapses, it was because I moved in the wrong direction of understanding. I would often say the crisis would happen when I'm thriving, but really I was thriving in the wrong understanding. I was thriving in the mental health context. Like that last crisis before hospitalization in April 2016, I was doing stand-up comedy for mental illness. And then, lo and behold, I landed in the psych ward because the universe is sort of telling me, you're playing in the wrong understanding. So even if you're at the top of that understanding in terms of being able to laugh at it and make fun of it and joke and things, it's still not the correct understanding. So it's sort of moving in that context to stay loyal to that context and stay loyal to all of that has supported me, but I still always hit the ceiling of possibilities. Because to be at the top of that trajectory is still something that completely weakens my nervous system. So I'm going to start a note. Things to say when I get back. Something about how I had a lot of time to think about my life and what I might want to do moving forward. So that might be something that invites someone to ask me about something like that without saying, I came back to start this, and this. So, and I could also anticipate questions people might ask me like, are you going to go back to work? What are you going to do? Blah, 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 for money, yada, yada. So I could just say what's really important to me right now is reintegrating, because I've spent a lot of time in quiet and nature, and now I'm coming back to a completely different environment, which could be somewhat of a shock. So my main focus right now is to minimize shocks to my nervous system and create joy in my home environment and really move from that space of joy. One thing that concerns me is that I read in Dr. David Hawkins' work that sometimes we're limited by the level of the collective consciousness of the area. And I know in California that the level of consciousness might be slightly higher, so there might be a step down in consciousness to the surrounding environment. And that's not necessarily true, because I have tons of great people in my life back home. So it's not necessarily true. I'm not trying to say, this place is so enlightened and back home isn't. And really, it's about, can I keep the strength of my nervous system no matter where I am? And also at the same time minimize the things that I know would weaken my nervous system, like working in mental health. So it's about lifestyle design based on what I know about my nervous system. And there's so many people that I miss so much that without them, my level of consciousness or whatever would have never gotten to the place that it was ever at to be able to go to California in the first place. So I'm not trying to say one is good or the other is bad. I'm just saying that 6 years ago when I was in California, when I went back home, it was quite the shock, and it's something that put my nervous system into shock and went into map consciousness, and everything felt new because I was away for a while, and then I really was in this extremely high state of consciousness because I sort of did bring that high state of consciousness back with me, but then it bottomed out eventually. So I'm wondering about minimizing the possibility of that. It's not a 1 + 1 = 2 thing. It's very multidimensional. I don't even understand it. I'm going to maybe learn a lot about this going back, because I've never left for a long period of time and then gone back. It might be a complete disaster. It might be completely fine and I might not really notice anything. Or I might just notice a lot of things that I didn't notice would bother me before, but now being away and then being back, I'll have the context to actually learn more about what I can design into my life and what I could remove. So maybe I'll just have to go seek out nature more intentionally, for example. Whereas here, it's just everywhere. So I don't have to intentionally set up my day to be in nature. So there's just really practical things, and then energetic things and functional things. There's a lot of different dimensions, and just getting those needs met and knowing that my nervous system has some very unique needs, especially since I've been in dialogue with it for so long. I kind of have a sense of that. So yeah, just not getting overwhelmed. And I know in speaking this way it sounds like, oh, this place is so enlightened and back home is just like this pile of crap. It's not that way at all. It's probably going to be a lot easier than I think. It's just a matter of actually fearing what happened 6 years ago, being in California and then going home, and basically having that as my indoctrination into the mental health system. So a lot of this, talking to myself about this particular thing, is just really fear-based, and also fearing being off meds and then going back home and not having the right dialogues about it, and maybe saying something to somebody that I shouldn't. And I just really have to be strong and hopefully joyful. And it's sort of contradictory for me to talk about fearing those things when I'm saying whatever happens is sort of created in the nervous system first and then it's manifested. So what understanding do I need in order to go home with an understanding that will unfold in helpful ways, in ways that I would self-direct for myself, in terms of being healthy and being happy? And one thing that might bother me is seeing some of my friends struggling. That might be difficult because here I am doing well, and then to watch them struggle makes me feel like I'm struggling because I don't feel separate. So I'll have to remember how one person told me that I can't lose my own health in perceiving the suffering of others, because if I do, then I can't do anything to help somebody. So I wonder what I can do. Maybe just not do anything, just listen. Not feel like I can do anything, but just really be with that person. Yeah, I really don't know. I just hope that, I don't know. But I feel like I need to be off meds for a while before I share that with people, because it needs to really be integrated. So I'll be home, and then maybe when I'm home for several months, then it might be time to share that. But I do need to be careful with premature sharing, because I do consider this as like research, and sharing the results too soon, even though people might watch this at some point and say, well, why didn't you share right away? That would have changed the way it would have unfolded, because people would have been saying stuff like, you should do this, or have you tried that, or yeah, blah, 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 when I really need to be integrated in that before I share it, I feel. So I'll probably do another video, because I want to talk more about that superhuman stuff, and I wrote some other stuff today too. So it's really piling up. So I wonder when I go home if I'll have space to just keep talking to myself and the rest of the time just have a joyful life. And then tomorrow I'll probably be saying, oh, the rest of the time I'm creating a pure respite. I don't know. It might not be quite time for that yet. So I'm realizing that I need to create the joy in my brain first, and then people who share all the same consciousness will just naturally pick up on that, and I'll have the right people in my life. But I do want to talk more about this superhuman podcast from Ken Wilber and finish that off, and then I'll be done for the day. And then there's the business extrapolations that I'll probably save for later, because I feel like I need to shift the focus to joy and maybe be in the business of just joy. And that's why I kind of want to study with Patch Adams or something. Just really go deep into this joy domain. I was really joyful for quite a period of time when I was taking medications, and in that joy was really the protection. And as soon as I lost that joy by working in peer support and not being so connected to my community, things didn't go well, because basically the joy wasn't in my nervous system, so joyful things did not happen. So maybe one day there's a way to be joyful and work in mental health, but I don't know if that is the case right now. And if it's not in my nervous system, I'm going to experience whatever is resonating through my nervous system. So I need to create that. So yeah, maybe just be in the business of creating joy in my nervous system. And I feel like from that higher state of consciousness, then the things that I envision creating will unfold in more magical ways that are requiring less effort than if at a lower state of consciousness. But then, that being said, if one is too joyful, one can be perceived as being manic. And I've talked about it's not safe to be that joyful in this life. And especially already having a label, I could easily be misinterpreted. So joy is kind of dangerous too. I really don't know what to do. I'm just talking to myself. That's all I can do, really. So on to the Ken Wilber stuff. He has this thing he talks about, aqua, which is all quadrants, all lines. And I won't go into his theory because he has pages and books full of great information. So Ken Wilber, The Spectrum of Consciousness is one book. There's a ton of stuff, but he says quadrants, lines, states, and types come online. You are actually creating the new human being. And that's really interesting, because basically he's saying we're creating the new human being. New humanity will have nothing to do with the old. And this resonates with me because when I first went into map consciousness, it had nothing to do with my old mode of operating whatsoever. So I'm sharing this because I feel like what he's talking about is very similar to map consciousness, but people who go into map consciousness just in an instant have a hard time integrating. So it's different than maybe moving towards an integral level of consciousness consciously, step by step. We're just sort of pushed into it by the universe, which gives a blueprint which can be helpful to unfold, but we don't really have a framework of understanding to be able to do that. We're just locked in a chemical prison. And he was using we language, like we have no idea what this would look like. As in, he was saying that he doesn't even know what this new humanity is going to look like, but he's really indicating that we have to create it. He says we have to make it up as we go, because we're having to make it up as we go, so we don't even know what it will look like. He said we need people in this superhuman condition. Once you find it, it will start to develop. And for me, map consciousness finds us a lot of the time, and it starts to develop. So that's why having an understanding of this could be helpful, or even moving in this kind of understanding to create a map of map consciousness before one ever experiences map consciousness. It's like drawing the map step by step instead of waiting for the universe to throw you in that territory. It's like getting to draw the map with the lights on during daytime versus being thrown in the same territory in the dark and being expected to draw the map. So I feel when map consciousness comes upon us, really we've stumbled upon superhumanity. I even wrote a note to myself to listen to this podcast every day because I thought it was so good. And I feel like my self-dialogue is my superhumanity in a way, or it's creating my own theory of my own superhumanity. And if we create a path, there is no path. It means we're actually creating the path as we go. And he talked about levels of altitude and asked, what is the ingredient of altitude? And it could be the degree of consciousness and complexity. And I actually made a note related to Dr. Daniel Siegel's context and how he talks about how differentiation and linkage is important. And I felt like this is not related to the Ken Wilber thing, and I'll probably talk about it later because I won't be checking it off my list of notes, but it just sort of relates to this complexity. I feel like in map consciousness, we start to be able to link very well. We can link this, we make new insights and associations, and we can see how things interrelate, but we're not able to differentiate. So really, Dr. Daniel Siegel says differentiate, then link. But we're linking and linking and linking without differentiating. So all of a sudden everything feels like us, and we're not able to discern inside from outside and me from them. It just feels like all one movement. And then that could be true on some level, actually. But the thing is that it makes it hard to function when we don't really know these distinctions. So there could be a different differentiating and linking process than the one that maybe he describes, one that's actually more actual.